On episode 257 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Dr. Karl Knopf and discuss his book, Stretching for 50 Plus. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/257. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, and thank you for being a part of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. Before we get to our guest today, I did want to take a moment to make a couple of re-announcements. If you haven't been listening, you should know that we are about to kick off a step challenge in June. We're going to try to get 10,000 steps per day, each day for the month of June. And so we're going to use an app called StrideKick. So you'll want to go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/step. And if you go there, you'll be able to sign up for the waiting list. And then on June 1st, I will send you the link so you can get all hooked up to me on StrideKick. And you can find me on StrideKick now, Alan Meisner. I'm pretty easy to find there, and we can connect straight away. But go get on the waiting list so I can go ahead and make sure to invite you to the challenge on June 1st. And again, that's 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/step. Second, Maria on the last episode offered up a free copy of her cookbook, Keto Comfort Foods. And as you know, I love this book. I actually had the étouffée again last night for dinner, and happy to say that there's plenty of leftovers, so I'm going to have it for lunch today as well. It's an excellent cookbook, something I think you'll really enjoy if you're even considering a little bit of low-carb eating or going into ketosis. All the recipes in this book are really, really cool. So you should go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/Maria, and that should forward you to the Facebook page for 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. And there, what you're going to want to do is there's a pinned post. You're going to want to share that post while tagging at least one friend that you think would be interested in the cookbook. So please do this. There's not many people that have done it so far, so your chances of winning are really, really high. Go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/Maria. Our guest today is the author of Weights for 50 Plus and a whole myriad of books geared toward individuals that are over the age of 50. He is the president of the Fitness Education of Older Adults Association and has served as an advisor to PBS exercise series Sit and Be Fit. Our guest today is Dr. Karl Knopf. So Dr. Karl, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you, Alan, for giving me this opportunity to discuss the importance of engaging in a regular flexibility program for your listeners.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, obviously I'm over 50, and having had an office job for most of my life, I recognized fairly early on when I started trying to get back into shape that mobility and flexibility were going to be two areas where if I didn't take the time to do those things, then I wasn't going to accomplish the other health and fitness goals that I had, and I was probably more likely to injure myself because I didn't have the mobility and flexibility.
And Alan, you made a very good point, and this is a bit sexist, but too often guys don't stretch. Women tend to historically be involved in stretching programs and yoga and Pilates, where guys tend to go to the gym and lift more weights, and ride the bike or go for a run or something. And that seems to be a forgotten aspect of many people, but it seems really common in men. And unfortunately, then as we get into our 50s, and I've even got a son who's 30 and who's muscular, and he's starting to get all those chronic aches and pains, which if he would stretch, I think he'd remediate most of his aches and pains.
Yeah, and it is, if you're not lifting with good form because you don't have the dorsiflexion in your ankles or your hips aren't moving in proper alignment because you really haven't stretched out your psoas properly, then you're right. You're going to be in a situation where you're not in an optimal position and you're putting additional stress on your joints that you probably don't need to.
And now that's a good point too, is that too often what I find with people who stretch is we don't start stretching until we have a specific goal in mind, like, I've got a backache or an injury and I've got to fix it, or I want to improve my golf swing, because I was watching the golf tournaments on TV the other day, and you could almost tell who was the pro and who was the amateur. That pro just had the mobility through their spine, and how many super athletes do we see that have to end a career early because of some type of soft tissue injury, And so I think, and they spend time in the gym and we won't stretch because it seems boring. It seems like you're really not accomplishing anything because you don't have the macro development of it. You don't see any real results over immediately.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it while I'll admit when I played football, stretching was a kind of a thing, but, we didn't do a lot. It was, stretch your legs, do this, do a little bit of that, and then let's get up and start moving around. And so I think for most of us, we felt like it was somewhat of a wasted 5 minutes. And it probably was a wasted 5 minutes because we really weren't getting good quality stretching. You kind of put it in the beginning of the book that I really like this. You said, stretch what is tight and strengthen what is lax. Do into the front what you do into the back, and do into the left what you do into the right. And I think a lot of times when we were taught stretching when we were younger, if we were taught at all, it really wasn't. It wasn't really that simple, and it wasn't taught that way. It was, your hamstrings need to be stretched, your calves need to be stretched, and without any maybe regard to maybe they didn't.
Yeah, and you bring up a couple of really good points. Is many of us who are over 50, we were taught these outdated rules, and we remember in football you were bouncing your toe touches, and again it was 5 minutes, and it was a cold Friday night, and you're trying to stretch, and I'm surprised that more injuries didn't occur, and unfortunately, you would think the coaching staff would have evolved, but I've had two sons who have played football and not that many years back, and they were doing the basic same.
We're still doing cherry pickers.
Absolutely, yeah. But I like what you picked up out of the book because that's the other thing too is most of the sports that your listeners play, whether it's golf or tennis, they're asymmetrical. So you're always swinging left to right. And so we start to develop muscle imbalances. And funny, because I was talking to one of the checkers at the grocery store the other day, and I was so pleased to hear this. He was checking my stuff out, and then all of a sudden he went away, and a new checker came, and I go, well, did I tick somebody off? Did I say something wrong? He said, no, what we do every hour or so, we've got the checkout stands, so sometimes you're checking for an hour from left to right, then you go to another check stand, and then you're going from right to left. So they said they've reduced the amount of injuries with their staff with workers' comp claims, just being mindful of balancing things out.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought that was very impressive.
So we've already kind of talked a little bit about how stretching's not supposed to work. And so I think, kind of getting a better concept of what good stretching is and the value of good stretching. Could you take a little bit of time and talk about that?
Yeah, and I think we use these words interchangeably, what is flexibility, what is stretching. And it was funny, I was reading something in, I think, the latest AARP. They talk of 21 health reasons to do yoga. And I think many of us over 50, when we were younger, stayed away from yoga because it was a mystical thing, it was a religious thing. But to me, stretching and yoga or even Pilates or any of those things could be interchangeable. So what we're really looking for is I'm never going to be a Gumby. I'm never going to be a world-class athlete, dancer. If you watch Dancing with the Stars, I'm always amazed how so flexible some of those people are. But when we talk about flexibility is having the ideal amount of mobility in your joints so you can do what you want to do. And I've just noticed as I've gotten older, for some reason my shoes are much farther from my arms than they used to be.
Your arms got shorter.
Yeah. Or some of the women listeners, they're going to say one of the only reasons they stayed married is so the husband will zip up their zipper in the back of their dress because they can't do it anymore. So when I say flexibility or stretching, it's to having an ideal or optimal amount of range of motion around a joint and be able to do what you need to do. And what's unfortunate, as you said, the hamstrings. So like in football, we'd always do those great pickers and hamstring stretches, but then we never did anything for our shoulders. So a stretching flexibility program has to be comprehensive. Just because you're stretching your hamstring doesn't mean it's going to work for your quads or for your lower back or for your shoulders or neck. So it really requires more than that 5 minutes to do a comprehensive full body stretching routine.
Yeah. I know when I was going through my training for corrective exercise, and they'd have us evaluate ourselves. And what I found was, I had a problem that I thought was a hip problem, but after analyzing it, realized it was actually my calves. And my calves get really, really tight. They're very strong, but they also tighten up. And, and so what I've found is if I want to do anything, and that be that walk, run, squat, anything with my legs, I have to stretch out and mobilize my calves first. If I don't, my range of motion is going to be wrong, and I risk injury to my lower back. So, I mean, and that's the whole chain. Just to thinking that my calves play such an important role to me protecting my lower back.
And you brought up an excellent point, Alan. It's that kinetic chain. And what often happens is, if there's an old song, I think in the 50s, that the ankle bone's connected to the knee bone, et cetera, and that's what we have to be mindful of. That and that's what often happens too, as you said in your corrective exercise training, is that I can sprain an ankle, and then I wonder why the opposite hip hurts in 3 weeks, because it throws our alignment out. And that's what I guess you and I are trying to get to the point is, people need to stretch that every aspect of their body, not just their neck or their shoulders or calves. It's all interconnected. And that's what we see with people who are at a desk all day or behind a shovel. You've got to be flexible in all aspects. And that you brought up another good point too, is the beauty of stretching is that it doesn't require any special equipment, and it can be done at the workstation. It can be done. I'm finding, if people have good enough balance, they can do it in the shower or in a swimming pool, or even when they're waiting in line at the checkout stand.
Yeah, you'll get a couple stares, but it's worth it. Now, obviously, you mentioned earlier, like the kids getting out there on a Friday night, it's cold, and they start doing their stretches. There are safe ways to do stretches and unsafe ways to do stretches. So, can you kind of go through some of the safe ways that we can do stretching?
Yeah, I think the safe ways, Alan, would be it is to have that thermal warm up. And we talked about that with the football players. In the thermal warm-up is, if you're out there, let's pretend we're all looking at the football kids out there playing, to have them jog around the track a couple times and warm up the muscles. Because what I kind of make the analogy is stretching the body is like stretching a piece of saltwater taffy. And if you take a piece of saltwater taffy on a cold February morning where you live in, the Midwest, that thing's going to snap and break. But yet you take it on a hot, muggy summer day, that's going to be very, very pliable. So that's the analogy I like to make is our muscles are like saltwater taffy. Warm them up either through light activity or maybe a warm shower, a heating pad or something, a hot jacuzzi, and then do your stretching. So that's kind of real important to make sure that your body's warmed up enough to go ahead and do the stretching. And then the other thing that, Vince Lombardi, I think, said it absolutely wrong, no pain, no gain. I'm going to suggest this the opposite. Don't stretch to the point of pain, because if you're feeling discomfort, there's things going on at the molecular, cellular level that are doing damage to that muscle. So, you're going to feel some tension, that's okay, but you don't want to have pain, so that's one thing to keep in mind. People need to breathe. With this stretching, it's kind of like some people breathe into it. In yoga, they teach you a specific ritual to breathe in through the nose, hold, and so forth. We don't have to get that specific, but again, try to breathe regularly, and also don't bounce. And again, we're talking about those kids out there on Friday nights, how often when they do those cherry pickers, for your listeners, and I think they know what those are, you're bouncing up and down, and come up and jump up and down. Those ballistic or sudden movements can cause micro damage to the muscle as well. It might be okay after you're warmed up and after you stretch, but initially, don't do those bouncy stretches that we've all done in the past. The other thing is, and I'm not good at this because I'm a type A personality, I do everything fast, but when you're stretching, try not to rush. And you brought up a good point as well. And try to do everything as biomechanically as correctly as possible. If you're rushing and you're going to have the possibility of injuring yourself. Another don't is, if you've had a sprain or a strain or had a recent fracture, double check with your health provider to make sure that that's acceptable for you. And again, there's always that issue, again, back to on Friday nights, you watch the kids on the turf, and the linebacker is behind the running receiver and he's pushing him forward, is bending over, touch his toes, and pushing him down or pushing him forward. Don't overstretch a joint or a muscle. Then you're going to cause a particular issue. And if any of your listeners have osteoporosis or osteopenia, they need to talk to their health professional about what's the best stretch for them. And another thing, if stretching is good for men and women who have had cancer, but they've got to make sure that they're doing things that are appropriate. I know that out here in California, there's a Live Strong program run through the Wise, and they have all their trainers go through a specific program of what are the best exercises and stretches. And the other thing too is not everybody, if you and I are in the same gym or the same yoga class trying to stretch, you may outperform me, and stretching is not a competition. Each of us have our own joint structures and muscles, so not to overdo it. And then just to do it regularly, that's the key. Make it a regular part of your life, just like brushing your teeth, combing your hair, and then try to hold the stretch for about 15 to 30 seconds.
Yeah. I find I actually like to hold it just a little bit longer. If I'm breathing well, kind of get that, that there's a release, like you said, probably around that 15, 20 second mark. But I found as I've gotten a little older, sometimes it's just a little bit slower than that. So I think there's a point where you kind of feel where the muscle has kind of reached that good tension, that right spot. And then it just sort of lets go, and it's different for every person, because someone might be 15 seconds and they feel it and it's there they are. There's times when I feel like I just need a little bit longer for that muscle to really just kind of particularly in my calves to just really just let go.
That's a good point, because I think some of the research is saying if you could hold it for 60 seconds, that's great. Or even if you look at some yoga people, they hold them in that positions and postures for a longer period of times, and that's kind of why I think that hot yoga has become so popular, because you're in an overly warm environment, but again you feel more pliable too. But the other thing you kind of mentioned too, how to do it safe. We shouldn't hyperextend a joint or lock a joint. I mean, just be careful of where when we're back to what you said earlier about proper biomechanics. I mean, if it doesn't feel right and maybe look right, maybe it's not right. So I mean, you got to use a little common sense, because I've seen some people go to stretching classes, and just because usually the instructor of a stretching class is very pliable themselves, and we all try to replicate what the teacher does, and it's often maybe not within our skill set.
Yeah, I'm watching their elbow turn the other direction. I'm like, nope.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point too. And I think we've gone through. You sound like you've been around fitness most of your life. We've gone through that whole series of more is always better, and that's not necessarily true. And if after 2 hours of stretching you feel worse than when you started, you may need to back off a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm even though I'm in California, I'm not really the over the top mind body person, but I am starting to find out that if you can kind of stretch and just stay in the moment and make it an integrated mind body experience, and it's too often we see people at the gym, it's just mandatory from I've worked out, I've ran, and I got to do 5 minutes of stretching, and they're not into it. It's You really kind of got to turn your attention inward when you stretch and kind of turn off all the external distractions of watching the TV or the news while you're trying to stretch.
Well, it's kind of like your idea earlier where, you said, you can do it just about anywhere. And I think the point is realizing that, over the course of a day, it would probably behoove you to go ahead and spend some time stretching each and every part of your body. So maybe after the workout, you've worked your legs, so you spend some time really focused on the legs because they're warm at that point. And then, later on in the afternoon, after you've been sitting at your desk for a little while, you do a little bit with your back and with your upper torso and your arms and neck. Just kind of let the tension go. And then later in the evening, we work on your ankles and, maybe your wrists and some things like that. And so I think, you don't have to look at it as I have to do a 2-hour practice every day to get the benefits, because I think you can get the benefits in little bits in time. But like you said, you have to kind of really have that focus and purpose so that you're really getting the value out of the time that you're spending doing the exercise.
I love what you said, and hopefully your listeners really paid attention to that, because that's really a smart idea. That maybe after your morning run you focus on a certain area, but throughout the day after a long drive home, you do some, maybe at the stoplight, you do a couple next to it. I love that idea, what you're doing, or watching TV, you do your ankle circles and mobility of your ankle. That's a super idea.
Now, I know with static and ballistic, there's been kind of a little bit, I'm not going to say it's controversy, but there have been some studies, and they've talked about, if you're an athlete and you're working on strength, you might not want to do static stretching, because after doing static stretching, the muscle might not be as strong. So they kind of recommend more of the ballistic stretching when you're going to be actually doing something physical with that muscle that's going to require strength or athleticism. What are your general thoughts? I mean, I know that wasn't really kind of a part of the book, but you're not a big fan of the ballistic.
No, I think you put two. You brought up two very good points, and there, and I'll see if I can remember both of them as you brought them up. One is, you're right. If you're out there playing golf, you've got to do some ballistic things. But I think what we need, and I think the research is, I think it is a controversy. I do think it depends on what book or what trainer and what organization you go through. I think it's we have chocolate and vanilla, and I think they are mutually exclusive of each other. I think what I'm trying to suggest is, one, if you're older and you're deconditioned, you better start with some gentle static stretches, and then maybe as you've warmed up, then you do your more dynamic, and let's call them even dynamic stretches rather than even ballistic. So I think so I think they both go hand in hand. I think I just keep hearkening back to, I've seen so many young people sit there, bounce, and that's what I think I've been fearful of, given that we're aiming at a 50-plus population, that they've had some changes in their bodies that maybe are not as, it's like I was inside. I have a friend who's a pilot, and he let me go inside the cockpit one time, and they had so many backup systems. Well, we're pretty good. By the time we got to 50, many of us have abused our body, and some people have disused it, but we just got to be safe and sane. And so I think they do go together, but I think just be careful and start maybe with the static ones first, get a baseline of fitness and flexibility, and then go. And I think rather than call them ballistic, let's call them active stretches.
Yeah.
Active stretches can be done slowly to lubricate the joint and those ankle circles and so forth. So I think we're agreeing that both are a critical component of a total fitness program, especially if you're sports specific.
And I agree. It really, you have to use a little bit of common sense here, because I was in a CrossFit class, and they tended to this one, they particularly they kind of like to do the dynamic, go out and go for a run, warm up. Okay, now you're ready to do these different exercise things. And sure enough, one of the guys tore an Achilles, doing the ballistic stuff, and I was going slower than everybody. Being older, I just kind of accepted, okay, I'm not going to keep up with the 20-year-olds, but he's probably a 30-year-old trying to keep up with the 20-year-olds, and he hurt himself, and as a result, he kept coming into the CrossFit, and he was doing other stuff, but you could tell he was out. He was not gonna, he was falling behind, and he felt bad about it, because he wasn't able to keep up with the class. And so just realizing that as we get older, those injuries, they're not something we bounce back from really quickly. So being responsible, taking care of yourself, and making sure that you're getting good stretching in and doing it the right way is really important.
And I'll hearken to two things. Then I'd like to maybe just talk about some of the factors in influence flexibility. But after I retired, I thought I was going to go revisit my past. So, I'm out here in California. I was going to start surfing again, and I did something to my rib cage and the intercostal muscles, and it's taken me 4 years to get over some of this. So yeah, you're right. Things don't heal as quickly as they did when you were 25. But I think each person should look at their body, like you said before when you did your training, is everybody should take an inventory of themselves, get a good trainer, but think that factors that influence flexibility, joint design. It's, how that joint is designed, age. With age, most people undergo some loss of elasticity in their connective tissues and muscles. Gender, women historically are more flexible than men due to the anatomy and some physical activity. If someone's doing a total body fitness program, they're going to be a little more flexible, but you've seen at the gym that guy that does only bench presses, and then you look at him from the side, from the front, he looks like a goddess, but from the side he's got rounded shoulders because his pecs are so tight. He's got kind of a kyphosis look. Temperature, I mean, I'm not a real fan of that hot yoga, but I understand that, if you put yourself in a jacuzzi or a sauna for a few minutes to get that core temperature up, that'll help facilitate mobility of the joint. Pregnancies, that's why some women have to be real careful in the latter months of their pregnancy that they don't overstretch, because the hormones influence the elasticity of the joint. Injuries, again, after that guy who's pulled that Achilles tendon, he's going to have some scar tissue there, so he's going to have to take a time to go and other things. I've had a very fit lady that I know who's doing CrossFit, fabulous shape. At 50, she had a massive stroke doing CrossFit, so she's going to come back, and her neuromuscular system's not going to function like she once did. And so, you brought some good points. And then, some of us just have historically tight muscles that really need a little more time. See, you were smart enough to know that I got to listen to my body, not to what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. So, the book is Stretching for 50 Plus, and it has really good guidance. It has illustrations for all the types of exercises you want to do. I mean, all the types of stretching you want to do. And another thing I like that you had in it is you talked about setting a baseline. And I think that's extremely important for someone to kind of see progress from the work that they're doing, because it kind of helps motivate them to keep moving forward. So kind of setting that initial baseline. And then depending on which specific types of activities, some of them sports related and others just regular day-to-day activities, I like how you kind of put programs in there to really help folks kind of work their way through to building their mobility and flexibility for each of those paradigms.
Yes, yeah, and so we try to kind of look at all things, and it's hopefully in the book it's designed for all levels. There's chair stretches, there's floor stretches. Some of them use props if the person wants to use a foam roller. I've also done a book with a foam roller, just exercise with a foam roller. So we try to do everything that we try to look at who could benefit from it, and I think everybody could benefit if they just have to. I see the book, to be honest with you, two ways. As a menu, you go in there and pick and choose those exercises. Doesn't have to end all be all. But there's a sports medicine doctor here out on the West Coast who uses my book, which I think is kind of neat. And he gives it to his patients. Then he gives them 3 or 4 exercises. He said, okay, next time you come back, we're going to change it. So that's the way it's kind of a way to take home a personal trainer with you, that have your physical therapist, your personal trainer say, hey, here's some things I want you to do to our next session. And that's what I've also found is that I've got a local massage therapist, and she does the same thing. So someone, too often in America, we want to be fixed. We want our health professional to fix us like the car mechanic. So what she'll do is say, okay, guys, you've got a tight TFL, a tensor fascia lata, or a QL, or whatever. She goes, I've massaged it all out. Now I want you to do these. She gives them the book, dog ears the page, and say, now go do these for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Then I'll see you again. I don't need to see you every week. You need to be proactive. And I like the model. I kind of use the model of the dental hygienist. They clean your teeth, and then they tell you to floss and brush your teeth 2 or 3 times a day. We, in fitness and physical therapy, we often don't do that. We say, okay, doc, fix me. I'm going to go back and do my golf swing that's historically bad and get hurt.
And I'll drill you. And then I'll come back in 3 months and I'll drill your teeth again. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we did the point you and I both agree on is we want people to be proactive. We don't want them to overdo it. Do what feels good, and that's what they call is a positive addiction. There's a psychiatrist here in the Palo Alto area that I listened to one time. He goes, the difference between a positive addiction and a negative addiction is a negative addiction is something that feels good while you're doing it but is bad for you. Where what you and I are saying, exercise and stretching is a positive addiction. It may not feel good while you're doing it, but the long-term effects are beneficial. And I think what I keep saying is exercise is good from the womb to the tomb.
Yes. And what I'm going to say is this, this is 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, and the book is Stretching for 50 Plus. But, hey, if you're in that gap between 40 and 50, don't wait. Get started now. This book is for you, too. He could have named it 40 Plus. He could have named it 30 Plus. He could have named it 10 plus. It's a book about stretching, and having mobility and flexibility is important in our everyday activities to make sure that we're healthy and to make sure that we're fit. And it's a very important paradigm. It's a very important modality for us. So thank you, Dr. Karl, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. If someone wanted to reach out to you and learn more about the book, where would you like for me to send them?
I'd appreciate it. The books are available at the local bookstores. Obviously, Amazon has them. And I'm going to give more information than someone probably could write down, but it's called Ulysses at ulyssespress.com. They have a list. I've done about 15 to 20 books, basically from water exercise to the stretching, and they can look up the books I've done. And like you said, I think we picked 50 plus because we're aiming at the baby boomer at the time, but I think you're right. Anybody over 30 or over could benefit from the book. So, Alan, I really appreciate the time you've taken with me, and if your listeners want to follow me, I'd be glad to have them contact me if they need to.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have the links to all of that and your contact information in the book all on the show notes for this episode. This is episode 257. So if you go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/257, I'll have all of those links and information there. So again, Dr. Karl, thank you so much for being a part of 40
Alan,
Plus Fitness.
Can I plug one more thing just in case anybody wants to reach me?
Absolutely.
I still have a email address at the college where I just retired from, but if they just contact Knopf Karl at foothill.edu, I'd be glad to contact them and get back if they have any specific questions.
Okay, and again, I'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. So again, thank you, Dr. Karl.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, would you do me a big favor and go and rate and review and subscribe to the program? I really do enjoy reading the ratings and reviews. It helps me know that I'm touching on the right points for you. It helps make the show better. So I really do appreciate all the rating and reviews from all around the world. I do actually have a service that allows me to see those, and I read every one. So I do appreciate it. If you could go give us a rating and review and also subscribe so you don't miss another episode, I'd truly appreciate it. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Erica Spiegelman and discuss her book, Rewired Adult Coloring Book, an adult coloring book for emotional awareness, healthy living, and recovery. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.